Hey,
Hey, hey,
Darlene.
how's it going?
We are rolling on another Tuesday. How are you doing?
Uh, it's going fast, just as fast as the last week went. This week is going by fast too. I need time to slow down, but it's always a pleasure to join you and everybody listening for our Tuesday talks. If you haven't shared episodes with a friend, if you haven't liked or subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do that. Also, downloading the episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts is a really great way for us to know the level of engagement. You can send us an email in the description for each episode on Spotify and Apple Podcasts is our email address. You can send us an email with topics you want to discuss, questions you have, and if it's something that resonates with us, we'll be sure to discuss it on an upcoming episode as well. So take the time to do that. Um, yeah, so we are back for another Tuesday Talks, and this is one of my favorite topics because this is my wheelhouse.
Yes, it is. Because today we are talking about special ed. Is now the time for special ed evaluations? We're coming up on Thanksgiving. Christmas will be here before you know it. And then that's half the year. And if you've been in education, your kids are going old enough. It's gonna roll. Once January hits, we're getting ready for testing season. We're getting ready for the end of the year. Summer will be here before you know it.
Yeah, for sure. So, in talking about special education tonight, we want to specifically talk about evaluations because, in my experience as a speech therapist in the schools, now is the time when teachers or parents, the concerns that maybe they had at the beginning of the school year, maybe the second 9 weeks, now they're like, okay, I'm really concerned. And now they want to call a meeting at school to really talk about what are some next steps to help the students out because what they have tried has not yielded the results that they were hoping that they would. So now's the time that teachers come and they want to talk about evaluations. Sometimes even parents come to the school and they want to talk about getting their kid evaluated for special ed as well. So I wanted to start, Val, with asking you about your personal experience as a teacher with special education and that whole process.
Yeah, so typical teacher experience for me has been sometime at the beginning of the year, near the beginning of the year, the special education teacher comes and brings me this folder full of stuff on kids who are in the special education program and things that I need to know. Depending on the school system I was in, some of that information was vast, some of it not so much, where I had questions to ask. And then I have to sign my life away and say that I'm going to do these things or I'm going to go to jail and lose my certificate. But in the process of the year, working with students who were either identified and students who were not identified, there's always come a point where I question, should you be? Like, so a case that a student is, I'm like, are they trying to give you an easier road to graduation and that's why they put you in? Because to me, you need some motivation. Like, I don't really see anything, any disability apparent. And then there's been the other side of the spectrum where I've had a kid who was not identified and I'm like, something was missed. Something's not quite right here. I've used all my superpower teacher tools that I know. I've looked some up in the process, and that something is going on. So
Yeah.
that's kind of been mine.
I think that happens with a lot of teachers. I think that even happens with a lot of parents too. And you just don't know, like, when is it a real issue? And I think that a lot of times waiting and trying different interventions outside of special education can be really beneficial. We talked about in other episodes that differentiation. It is hard for a teacher to have varying levels and abilities and skills in one class and needing to differentiate one lesson 3 or 4 different ways. Um, but, that is part of public education. So it can be hard to figure out, okay, when is this more than I can handle in the classroom? When does it require specialized instruction from a special education teacher. And what I noticed a lot is that parents and sometimes even teachers are very shocked by how long the special education process can take. Um, just generally speaking, because, we do a podcast that can be viewed by people across the country. In the United States, that process can take anywhere from 45 to 65 days. And these are calendar school days. It just depends on your district. Talking about 45 school days, that's very different, of course, than 45 calendar days. Because, we got school breaks, school holidays. So if you have tried interventions up until Christmas break, you all sign off on this evaluation process right before the holidays or winter break. That clock isn't ticking until we get back in January in some school districts. Now you have 65 days from that. That's 2 months of waiting. And so by the time you finish, if you signed off in January, now we're at the top of March. And once you have that meeting to say, okay, yes, they need special education services. Now, under IDEA, the Individual with Disabilities Education Act, the school district is given another 30 days to develop an IEP. So now we've gotten to March and we have another 30 days. Now it's April. We're almost at the end of the school year. There's not much that's going to change for that current school year. Now you're going to write an IEP and some things are going to be put in place. Then you have all your state testing. Then it's the end of the school year and it's done. So you'll see the impact of that IEP the following school year, perhaps. But I think that is the thing that strikes me the most is that parents and teachers don't really understand how long that process takes. A lot of times they question why it takes that long. Well, because your kid is not the only one in the lineup to be tested, number one. And it might require the services of staff that aren't physically in your child's building every school day.
Right.
Schools share psychologists, they share occupational therapists, speech therapists with many buildings sometimes. So they're not in your building every day. Sometimes school districts may need to outsource to an independent agency to complete some testing if they don't have that type of professional working in the school district as well. So there are a lot of factors. And so, the government decided that schools need ample time to be able to get this process done and get it done thoroughly and properly. So that's one of the things that sticks out to me, for sure.
Wow. Yeah. So just in case you guys didn't know, and like we said, like at the beginning, I don't know what you did when we were at the beginning, but Dr. Tiffany, this is her wheelhouse. Okay. So we are excited to dive into this today because it is an area of education that has a lot of federal regulations and it has a lot of ambiguity if you don't keep up with that stuff, if you're just, not aware. I think sometimes from a parent perspective and maybe a teacher too, we think certain things about what it means to be identified as a special education student. I definitely know some parents who are very leery of the label and some of the stigma that comes along with it. And so, Dr. Tiff, I'm wondering if you could talk about a few myths for us on this episode, if you don't mind, to help us out.
Of course, I would love to.
Cool. So we're going to play a game. And well, I'm not. Dr. Tiff is going to play a game. I'm going to ask the questions. And she is going to inform us with her expertise. So, Dr. Tiff, true or false? Kids who get special education services have to be in a separate classroom.
That is definitely false. There was a time when students who got special education services were taken out of their regular general education classroom and had to be in a separate classroom all day. The government has really gotten away from that because they felt like students needed to be around their typical developing peers, and there's a concept known as least restrictive environment that is written into IDEA that says kids who get special education services should be in the same classroom as their peers as much as possible. So there is research out there that shows that 2/3 of kids with learning disabilities spend at least 80% of their day in the general education classroom with other kids. And what happens is that special education teacher comes into the general education setting to provide the services to the child. So parents, sometimes they might be in the meetings, and you'll have some parents who want their kids out of the classroom. I want my kid separate. They need to have intensive instruction, and you're going to get pushback from the school because legally they have to justify why a child is outside of their general education setting for a certain amount of time. And you'll see on their IEP that even the databases that a lot of districts use will calculate the percentage of time that this child is outside of the general education classroom because it matters that much. Least restrictive environment, LRE is how it is abbreviated, is really important to schools, and it should be important to parents too. Because I think what happens a lot of times when kids are outside of their general education classroom, you might be in there with mixed age or grade levels in this classroom. You're not connected to your general education teacher. You're not connected with your peers. You're not around other typically developing kids to see how they're learning, to be around the instruction that they're receiving, because maybe you struggle in one area, but another area that the teacher might be educating the students on, you're good in that area. But what was happening was these kids were given IEPs and saying, okay, you need to go in this classroom all day. This is your classroom. Mm-hmm. So that one is definitely false. Kids who get special education services do not have to be in a separate classroom.
No, and I've taught in co-taught classes. They're typically called inclusion classes, where there's me and then there's a co-teacher who's usually a special education teacher. If it's done right, that is one of the most beautiful situations that your student can be in, to draw on the expertise of the subject matter teacher and the special education teacher. Every student in that classroom can benefit from those situations. I kind of think all classes need to be co-taught, but again, that's just me. Okay, next, Dr. Tiffany. So, true or false? Special education is not just for kids with severe physical or intellectual disabilities.
That is true. Special education services is not only for kids with severe physical or intellectual disabilities. I think this concept comes from days and years past where, you had disability categories like mental retardation. We don't use that terminology. However, when I first entered into this field in 2006, that was still a disability category on IEPs in the state where I worked. And there were a lot of parents who were opposed to that because it has such negative connotations with it, right? So no, your kid does not have to have severe physical or intellectual disabilities. In fact, most kids who have special education services don't have severe disabilities. The majority of students that get special education services have a learning disability. And that can include kids that have reading challenges, like dyslexia as well. And specifically, there are 14 different disability categories that your child could qualify under to get special education services, and only some of them require a physical component. I'll just run through the list really quick. Autism, deafness, emotional disturbance, hearing impairment, intellectual disability, multiple disabilities. That one could require a physical component. Orthopedic impairment, that one again could require a physical component. Other health impairment, specific learning disability, speech or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, which could require a specific physical component or cognitive component, visual impairment, and then for our little ones, developmental delay. So there are 14 categories that your child could fall under, and you heard me mention the physical component just a couple of times. So you don't have to have that severe physical or even severe intellectual disability. So make sure that when you are talking with your child's teacher and you are getting information on how they're doing, you're asking good questions to see if they're on the right track. Sometimes, like you said, Val, it could just be motivation. Like
Mhm.
this kid is bored. He
Mhm.
doesn't need special education service. He needs to be taught in a different way, have his learning differentiated. He needs to be given access to move while he's learning, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he needs specialized instruction. I think we have to be really careful when we start putting labels on kids.
Totally agree. Totally. Don't want to get mislabeling into and factored into what's going on, because I've seen it cause a whole lot more damage than good. All right, nice. So number 3, Dr. Tiffany, true or false? Getting services is really, really easy.
So I'm gonna say false to that one, but not because it can't be really easy or because it has to be a battle. It really depends on the situation. It should never be this hard fought battle to get your kids services. And I'm sure you've probably heard stories of parents who had to fight to get services for their kids. But there are a lot of stories out there that don't include that battle piece. Knowing your kids' rights and your rights as a parent can make a huge difference in the process. If anybody listening has ever been through the special education process, you know you were given a thick, double-sided stack of papers stapled together as your parents' rights. And I think not a lot of people read them. I've tried to read it myself. I've never read it through and through. It's a lot of legalese talk in there. It's wording taken straight from IDEA, which doesn't read in a way that we typically read magazines or, articles. So it can be hard to understand. So you need to know your rights. If you have questions about it, there are advocates out there. There are special education specialists, educational consultants like myself that can help you make sense of your parent rights. And if you want to get your kid evaluated for special education services, I've said this in episodes in the past, it's very simple to initiate that process due to the fact that parents have rights regarding their child's education. You simply send an email. I like email because it's a trail, it's a document trail. You can also write a note. You need to put in writing, I want my child evaluated for special education services. Boom, bam, done. Done. You might meet with the school and they try to deter you from getting the special education evaluation started. They might cite all different reasons why your child doesn't need to be evaluated for special education. I myself have said in meetings with parents, like, this, what you hear in your child's speech is very normal. It's a typical development. I pulled out my charts and my graphs. And if they stuck to their guns and said they wanted their kid evaluated because you heard that speech and language impairment is one of those categories, I had to evaluate their kid. Even though the whole while I'm like, okay, clinically, this is just crazy. I should not be evaluating this kid. But the fact that the parent made that statement, stuck to their guns, the school had to accommodate their request. That's the parent's right. And so if you don't know that, you'll say that you want your child evaluated. You'll go into the meeting. You have these experts, teachers, administrators, all showing you paperwork, giving you good talks about why this child does not need to be evaluated. And you could walk away saying, okay, that makes sense. But I'm going to let the teacher keep trying what she's trying. Remember what we talked about at the top of the episode. It's fine to try the intervention. However, just know that once the decision is made for the evaluation, you're looking at up to 65 days just to get the testing, and then another 30 days to get the IEP done as well. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't have to be a battle, but it could be.
I think that's comforting to know that the more I know, then the better I'll be in the situation and the smoother it can go as a parent. And parents out there, as you heard Dr. Tiffany said, there are advocates. She is a consultant herself. So all you have to do is give her a call, shoot her an email. I'm sure she would love to help you. Yes.
I'll even stick my website in the chat for everybody watching.
Absolutely. Okay, so Dr. Tiffany, want to get through a couple of my other ones in the list, my true or false. So here's the next one, true or false. Kids who get special education have to take ADHD medication.
That is definitely false. So you can qualify, usually ADHD will fall under other health impairment because as you heard me go through the list of the 14 disability categories, you did not hear me say attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Typically that falls under other health impairment. So if your child falls under that category and has a diagnosis of ADHD, the school has deemed that they, meet the criteria to qualify for special education services under one of the disability categories because they have ADHD. Taking medication is an individual decision that you make with your doctor. It is not a requirement for your child to take medication. Now, sometimes that can be challenging in the schools because the child comes to school and just cannot pay attention. And you as a teacher might think, why don't they just get the child some medication and then they can focus? Some parents are not on the medication train. They want a holistic approach. They want circumstances, the environment to be changed, which is all definitely respected and honored. But your child does not have to be on medication for ADHD in order to get special education services to help them access education. They can change the classroom setting, they can change the way that they approach the child, they can change how they chunk information that they give, how they help the child stay organized with their materials, lots of different ways to help the child be successful educationally that don't require medication.
Right. Another case of the more you know, the better you can advocate for your child. I think as a parent, what I'm getting from what you're telling us, Dr. Tiff, is I don't have to feel bullied almost into them prescribing something for my kid if I'm not comfortable for it. And for parents to know that, that's liberating.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, good stuff. Listen, if you are loving all this information from Dr. Tiff, if you could just leave us a little note in the chat, let her know that this is very helpful for you, and let her know if you would like more of this. I think Dr. Tiff has some webinars and workshops up her sleeve that she would love to get you into the room for. Okay. All right. Next one, Dr. Tiff. Question, true or false? If my kid is identified as special ed, then they'll have to take a special ed bus.
Oh, the short bus myth. No, that's not true. We all know the special ed bus, called it a short bus. So some kids do get put on special transportation, is how it is referred to on their IEP. So let's say, for instance, your child qualifies under autism spectrum disorder. Their home school, the school that they've been going to every day up until they were found eligible, doesn't have an autism program to service them. So the school is going to find a neighboring school that your child can go to that has the services they need since they qualified under autism spectrum disorder. So the bus that was coming to take them to their base, their home school, they're not going to pick them up anymore to take all the kids to one school and then take your child to their other school. The district is going to have to arrange special transportation, and that could be why you see a special education bus or the short bus come pick your child up. It has nothing to do with their disability category. It's just a matter of logistically sending out a whole long regular sized school bus to pick up your child and maybe a couple others to take them to a school that's outside of their school zone is just not feasible. So you might have a shorter bus come and pick your child up. But if you talk to your child about it and make them feel comfortable with it, I don't think that there's any reason for them to feel any kind of way about it. It's just an option that's given. You don't have to take it as a parent if your child goes to their neighborhood school and that school have the services they need, they can get on the regular bus like they've been getting on every day and go to school. When those services aren't provided, they're homeschooled and they have to go to a school outside of their zone, that's typically when you'll see the special education buses come. And it doesn't say special ed on the side of it. It's just a shorter bus, a smaller bus, because it's not being filled up with as many kids.
That's it. Yeah. So the difference between riding in a 2-seater versus you got a mom minivan because you just got more to carry. Exactly. Same thing.
Yes.
Cool. Okay. So true or false, kind of like parent-teacher perspective. If a teacher has never had special education themselves or a child, then that teacher won't know how to support a child who does.
Okay, so again, this can be very dependent on the teacher in the classroom. So if you don't have firsthand experience with special education, it's natural for you as a teacher to worry about how you're going to relate. If you've never co-taught, like you talked about before, you've been in some great co-teaching settings where you had a special education teacher come in. It was great. But that's because you had some experience with special education yourself. So imagine as a first-year teacher, you're coming out, you don't have any experience with special education. You get a classroom with 3, 4, maybe 5 special ed students in there. You have this co-teacher coming in. You don't know if she or he is great at their job or if they suck at their job because you have nothing to compare it to, right? You know that they're supposed to come in your room and you know the kids that they're supposed to work with. So I think it is important to have a good relationship with your co-teacher outside of them coming into your classroom so that you can create some synergy with them. You all can be on the same page. You can talk openly about the students that you're working with. And I think that helps create a good environment to help make things seem and appear very cohesive. And as a parent, I think it's okay for you to ask in the meetings, so does my child's teacher have experience with special education students in their classroom? And see what answer you get, because I think that's important. It does speak to the quality of it. If no, then ask how they're going to get the teacher up to speed. Are they going to offer some continuing education? Are they going to get them the training they need? Are they going to partner them with a very strong special education teacher who's going to come into the classroom to co-teach? How are they going to mitigate the fact that he or she does not have experience with special education students?
I love that tip because as a teacher, I have always been an advocate, a very strong advocate for adequate professional development. And I've been in a lot of situations where I felt like there just wasn't enough. But what gets some of those things done inside the school building is the push from the parents. So parents, the more you advocate for and push for the things that your child needs, then the more likely it's going to happen. And again, as we've been saying throughout this episode, that's based on your knowledge. So the more you know, the more you're familiar with the ins and outs, the better you can advocate.
That's right. The parents' right goes back to that.
That's right. All right, Dr. Tiff, we got one more for you. Okay. Right. And so true or false, a kid who receives this special education label can at some point get that label taken away.
Yes, they can be dismissed from special education services. So having your child evaluated for special education and then being found eligible, which means they qualify for services, doesn't mean there's a lifelong road in special education. It doesn't have to be that. Every 3 years, a child in special education is required to be reevaluated, either through a review of records or through formal testing. So every 3 years, your child needs to be reevaluated to redetermine if they're eligible to continue with special education services. So there's not this label that will be stuck on them forever in this stigmatizing way. I've seen students exited from special education and it's been a great celebratory thing. And I've seen students exited from special education when we all were like, oh no, this is not a good situation. But there are criteria that you have to meet for each of those special education disability categories I mentioned earlier. If your child doesn't meet the criteria, then they can't qualify for special education services. And a lot of times that comes down to cognitive scores, their IQ that the psychologist collects during their testing. It could be testing in educational subject areas that the diagnostician assesses. It could be the speech therapist that's also evaluating as well, that could demonstrate that when the child was tested on that day, that time, they performed well enough to be exited from special education services. Now, if you read your parent rights, you know that while that determination can be reached, you don't honestly have to sign anything to say you agree with that. And your child could stay in special education for as long as you want. Parents have a lot more rights than they think. We never want to get into that situation as a school, to be in this battle with parents. No, your child needs to be exited, and you're saying no, they don't. And now we, headed to due process, like a whole thing that can happen. Nobody wants to do that. So just keep that in mind, that being eligible for special education services doesn't mean they'll always be eligible for special education services. So they can come in and come out. They can come in and stay. It really just depends on the kid.
Ooh, so good. Oh my gosh, so good. I don't know about you guys, but I'm pretty sure if you were listening just a little bit, you learned some things. Like I learned some things as well. Like I didn't know you could say no and keep your child in there. Like that just is a testament to, you have to get informed. We parents have to be informed, and teachers as well, because we're a part of that process. And our goal is to provide the kid with the best education that we possibly can. So the more we know, the better we'll be able to help our students who are identified as needing special education services.
Mm-hmm. For sure. This was fun.
This was good.
I can talk about this all day. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. Again, share your questions, your comments. Don't forget to share this episode, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, with friends. Join us every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. And with that, we will see you all next week. Have a good one.
Bye, you guys.